So I'd love to hear your opinions on, where we are with digital leadership and what you think are the key success factors for digital leaders across the organization going forward.
Sure. I'm happy to start on that one. As Scott knows, leadership is near and dear to my heart, having spent a bunch of my career in the leadership development space. So I think a couple of things, because there were, I think, a couple of components of your question there. The first is, I think, absolutely, we've noticed that there are these emerging capabilities, which, by the way, we wanted in our leaders in the past, but it wasn't as prevalent in a non-crisis time. And especially for an organization that I'm with, like Mastercard, times had been pretty good. And so even though, we had leadership development interventions, and we talked a lot about, diversity of capability, even things like digital dexterity, our people hadn't really been tested, and they're really being tested now, especially our leaders. So I think some of the things that we've been wanting to build in the past are just more accelerated now. So things like resiliency. Do you have resilient leaders? Learning agility, right? Connected to that digital dexterity, but can you quickly pivot and think about things, think about patterns in a different way, bring different patterns together? There's actually a great book I'm reading now by an author named David Epstein called Range. And it's actually fascinating because it really is about the importance of what they call range with it, which is this breadth of knowledge, not just deep specialization, but having the breadth of knowledge so that you can bring novel ways of thinking to new problems. Because this global pandemic is a great example of a wicked problem. And each of us just sitting, in our own kind of functional silo or role, thinking about it just in the ways that we typically tackle those problems that we used to encounter every day, didn't cut it anymore. And so thinking about how we can really help develop range in our people and have people value that struggle. I'm actually dealing with this with my own learning and development team at Mastercard, because they like to come and show me all the great feedback we get from our programs. People love it. They had such a great time. Our NPS score is off the chart. And I say to them, well, did they learn anything? Because we know learning happens in the struggle. And if everyone's coming out of there like they just had a Disney World experience, I don't know how much they actually learned. So I think it's some of that stuff changing the frame a bit. And then obviously how we're measuring things like leadership capability. I think we need to rethink that. So getting to that, I think the second part of your question around, a stat you threw out around organizations not having the leadership that they need. I don't know that I would agree with that. I actually think organizations have the leaders they need. I think we haven't changed the environment that these leaders operate in for a very long time. And that needs to be the next frontier as we think ahead to the future.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think about something like innovation. And I know you guys, design thinking is something you value as a skill at both of your companies, but you can't just teach somebody to say, here's how you run an experiment. They're not going to learn until they actually run an experiment and probably fail and iterate and pivot and do those things. And sometimes companies confuse, learning and impact with actually the experience of doing it, right? And more creating those opportunities is important just for not only for every employee, but for leaders. So Roger, how about from your side, any key success factors or insights around leaders and next generation leaders that you can share?
Yeah, I was just going to tag on to, we believe that experience is the best classroom. And while we kept saying digital first and we need to be thinking digitally, and we created all the learning resources that leaders needed for that and inspired them to think broadly around the digital landscape and so forth. That really wasn't resonating as much as we'd wanted to. And so we started saying, well, what are the outcomes? It's not about digital itself. It's what are the outcomes that you get from that around speed and agility and new forms of data that you never had access to, and ways of reaching customers in ways that we never had. And so once we started making those compelling arguments and started creating experiences, whether those were short-term experiences or longer-term experiences, we started to develop a capability that has started to take hold. And now we're intentionally moving people. We'll have really good leaders at the mid-levels in our clinical space or some of the other areas within health. And we have a digital health and analytics group. It's a fairly large organization within Humana, and we're making rotations through there to have these leaders who've not had that experience to go spend time there for 6 months, lead a project, and then come back. And it's just paying huge dividends for us to create the experiences versus trying to tell them what, or say, well, you use your cell phone and your mobile, so why wouldn't you do that for your job? The last thing I would say on that, Scott, is and Sarah, the tools are becoming extremely accessible to leaders. And so the ability to scale a digital environment is becoming easier and easier than it was even 5 years ago, 3 years ago. So low code environments, no code environments, the automation tools that are now available to leaders and their teams is becoming immensely accessible for lots of different individuals. So digital is no longer relegated to the IT department, the digital group, the coders and the programmers and the deep data scientists. It's now becoming much more mainstream in our organization.
Yeah. So the hurdle to engagement's a lot lower if
And
you're
much
willing to lean into it. And then I'd love to hear from both of you guys. Where have you had to challenge the HR model? Because you mentioned these tours of duty. I'm sure that wasn't part of your normal career pathing at Humana. So any comments on where you've had to challenge a traditional HR model about how people progress and learn and get experiences?
Yeah, we've challenged, a lot of our career framework and even some of our compensation practices, because we had the career framework where people needed to be slotted into certain types of positions, and you didn't feel like you were growing if you didn't move and have title changes and things like that. And we've had to rethink a lot of that to say that it's Sarah was making this point about range is really trying to help people understand it's the breadth of their experiences and what they're putting in their experience portfolio than it is a title or a level. That because we talk about being enterprise leaders, and you can't be an enterprise leader unless you have experienced multiple parts of the organization. And to facilitate that movement, we have to make it easier. So we've challenged a lot of our HR paradigms around that, because once you get into a hierarchy, then movement sideways and horizontally, moving into a lesser position because the experience will be great, and then it's just hard to go just completely against HR models and somewhat against human nature in some ways.
How about you, Sarah? Any way you've creatively created these micro experiences or tours of duty? Or
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. We're probably more traditional in that when we think about moving individuals around and mobility, we think about moving them to a new job, putting them in a different geography, a different business unit, working with a different manager. And when all of this happened, it challenged our model, because all of a sudden there were new opportunities that were created for the company, which was great from the crisis, but we didn't have a job for them, right? There was no one in a job that had been thinking about them. And very quickly we had to redeploy resources to specific opportunities. And we did it. It was painful. But it brought to bear that model, that more traditional job career model, is not really working for the future. And so what we're now building is our own internal talent marketplace, where we can take advantage of different opportunities and projects as they come up, and not be so reliant on the more traditional hierarchical structure. Another area that we were challenged was around objectives. So we set annual objectives every year, and our workforce came in, and we're on a calendar year, so they set them with gusto in January, and then all of a sudden in March, the rug got pulled out from under them, and they said, wait a second, how am I going to meet my sales targets? What does that mean for my comp? And there was a lot of anxiety about that. So again, just thinking about how our people practices need to evolve, be more flexible, be more dynamic, so that we can support our business as these changes, these unprecedented at times and unpredictable changes occur.